Hi everybody, my name is Chelo Fora Rosell and I'm going to present my paper Hamlet as a Woman, Reshaping Shakespeare from a Gender Perspective for the Seminar on Gender Studies on the International Women's Day. We will deal with Shakespeare as a means of social change, Shakespeare's gender revision, historical perspective, a 21st century gender perspective, and finally a conclusion. The idea of culture as a political means of denounced and struggle, and the idea of Shakespeare as a political tool is not new. Theatre director Michael Bogdanov proclaimed that the real aim of theatre and the true essence of Shakespeare are both political. Thus, in his article The Place of Shakespeare in a Multicultural Society, Bogdanov believes firmly in Shakespeare's revolutionary potential, whose power to appeal to new audiences is still intact, and that can be performed as a contemporary voice used to articulate protest as an instrument of social change. For Jonathan Dollimore and Alan Sinfield, in their work Political Shakespeare, Essays in Cultural Materialism, culture is directly connected to the historical events, being a consequence of them as much as a cause of those facts. In this sense, Shakespeare has been reinterpreted and reappropriated by new perspectives as far apart from the classical tradition as post-colonial studies or queer theory. As new versions and experimental adaptations have proved, the interpretation of Shakespeare's works is subject to permanent revisions which fuel the intellectual debate and enrich their understanding. Therefore, the ultimate revision of Shakespeare's works under the gender perspective is the logical consequence of the current critical approaches breaking through in the first decades of the 21st century. The concept of Shakespeare as a vehicle to show conflict and diversity opens up a means to fight for social change and rights improvement. Current critical approaches under the gender perspective readdress the deep analysis on Shakespeare's plays in order to grasp a completely different understanding from his works. Scholars such as Linda Boos, Lisa Jardine, Valerie Trope, Bruce R. Smith, Gail Pasta, Peter Erickson have contributed to develop this approach, focusing on the critical study of patriarchal structures, gender repression, and sexual manifestations in historical context, also analyzing their implications in contemporary societies. Thus, deconstructing Shakespeare's Hamlet from a postmodern critical approach makes possible to bring his characters to a contemporary social framework where gender values are reconsidered as a social construction. Therefore, under the gender perspective, Shakespeare's play acquires new meanings and its characters appear with an even greater significance, beyond the restrictive vision of traditional role genders. The endurance of the play to give a dramatic portrayal with sociopolitical transcendence is still relevant nowadays. Applying these ideas to the field of Shakespeare studies, there are two main trends in order to develop a gender revision on Shakespeare. The first way is to redefine female characters such as Ophelia, Juliet, or Lady Macbeth in feminist terms. The second method, more radical in its approach because of the gender transgression it implies, is to appropriate male roles such as Hamlet for its representative prominence and its cultural power. From a historical perspective, in his book Women as Hamlet, Performance and Interpretation in Theatre, Film and Fiction, Professor Tony Howard shows many credited and famous actresses such as French Sarah Bernhardt, Ukrainian Bertha Kalic, or Danish Asta Nielsen in the role of the Prince of Denmark. Also Spanish artists such as Margarita Xirgu and Nuria Spert, who have performed the role of Hamlet as an acting challenge from the beginning of the 20th century. Both British and non-British actresses, English-speaking as much as non-English ones, have recurrently dared to perform the male leading role of possibly the most canonical of Shakespeare's works. The allure of the Shakespearean character started to catch women artists' interest very early. In fact, there are records of women performances of Hamlet from the 18th century with Charlotte Clark and Sarah Siddons in the 19th. Sarah Bernhardt performed Hamlet for the first time in French in 1899 in Paris and later in London. She is credited to be the first actress to play the prince in a 2-minute silent film titled Le Duel d'Hamlet, directed by Clement Maurice in 1900. She developed her role in a classical way, which was a success, and she would be imitated by others such as Bertha College. Thus, Bernard became a new feminine canon for Shakespeare's Hamlet. Bertha College was the first woman to perform Hamlet in USA, when she acted the prince in Yiddish, the language spoken by German Jews, in Brooklyn, New York in 1900. College was often referred to as the Jewish Bernard. After her success in the role of Hamlet, she also performed in English in other parts of the US. College is credited as the first actress to make the transition from the Yiddish to the English stage in US. She performed in 7 languages, among them in Polish, German, Yiddish, and Romanian. Asta Nielsen was the first woman to act Hamlet in Danish, and later acted the role of the prince in a silent expressionist German film, Hamlet, a drama of vengeance, in 1920, directed by Sven Gade. The main idea of the film is based on the theories of the American scholar Edward Vining about the real feminine nature of the prince, explained in his book The Mystery of Hamlet, an attempt to solve an old problem, published in 1881. Margarita Xirgu was the first woman to perform Hamlet in Spanish when she exiled to Argentina after the Civil War in Spain, and she acted the role of the prince in Buenos Aires in 1938. She performed the prince in a classical version of the play, following Bernard's style. Xirgu was already a theater diva when she decided to act the role of Hamlet as a definitive performing challenge for an actress of her status. Notwithstanding 21st century female performances of the Danish prince, such as those by Blanca Portillo, Abke Haring, Maxim Peake, Ruth Negga, or Cash Jumbo, have applied a deliberate gender perspective with a feminist focus, which transforms the representation into an act of cultural activism that enhances Hamlet's reach in current society. With this new paradigm in mind, nowadays we are witnessing an increasing number of European female appropriations of Shakespeare's Hamlet from both British and non-British productions, English-speaking as much as non-English ones, which deserve an analysis to study the qualitative transformation of the character of the Prince of Denmark and the rebuilding of the play as framework to voice vindications of gender equality and gender diversity. Even when these vindications are not explicitly claimed in the female performances of the leading role mentioned, Hamlet's appropriation by women brings new shades to the character from a gender perspective. Hamlet's personal traits, such as his sexual ambiguity and his contradictory sensibility, are reinforced, directing the Shakespearean character mainly towards a non-binary interpretation. The director's point of view is crucial to decide a woman must be in the center of the play, impersonating Hamlet to give a new twist to the character, and by extension to the whole Shakespeare's work. In this sense, we can find 2 ways of appropriating the character of the Prince of Denmark: androgynous Hamlet, as performed by Blanca Portillo, Abke Haring, Maxim Peake, Ruth Negga, or Cash Jumbo, and a feminine Hamlet, as performed by Angela Winkler, Michelle Terry, or Tessa Parr. Among the androgynous Hamlet, Slovenian Thomas Pandur created a postmodern version of Hamlet for the third millennium for the cultural space El Matadero of Madrid in 2009. The play had an expressionist representation of characters, a scenography, and an aesthetic with echoes of the 1930s Berlin cabaret. He introduces natural elements such as water in the performance, representing a mirror between the world of dead and alive. Actress Blanca Portillo performed Hamlet as a woman who was raised as a man, in an androgynous representation of the Prince of Denmark, which retakes the theories of Edward Vining on the feminine nature of Hamlet. According to Vining, Hamlet is a woman, and this is proved by the feminine traits of the prince, his bodily features and his sensitiveness, besides his love to Horatio and his jealousy of Ophelia. Pandur's postmodern version and Portillo's androgynous performance both establish a new departure in Hamlet's gender appropriations, which has become a reference for later representations in the first decades of the 21st century. Abke Haring played the Prince of Denmark in Dutch. In the Netherlands production Hamlet vs. Hamlet, directed by Guy Cassiers and performed in Amsterdam in 2014. Haring played a delicate version of the prince in a scenography and costume aesthetic which are indebted with Pandur's Hamlet. Maxim Peake had a successful androgynous performance of Hamlet at the Royal Exchange Theatre in Manchester in 2014. This cross-gender production was directed by Sarah Francom and became a film version released in 2015. Maxim Peake played a smooth, sensitive Prince Hamlet in an attractive Bowie-like appearance. Rupniga played Hamlet in a minimalist postmodernist production directed by Yael Farber for the Dublin Theatre Festival in 2018. Charismatic Niga was credited to be the first black woman to act the Prince of Denmark. Her androgynous performance was acclaimed by the critic, and the play went on tour in the USA. Cass Jumbo played Hamlet at London's Young Vic in 2020, directed by Greg Hersov. Mediatic Jumbo was one of the star actors in the series The Good Wife and The Good Fight. Despite being addressed in masculine, she performed a powerful, non-binary version of the prince, full of personal magnetism which attracted good critics. Among the feminine Hamlet, Angela Winkler didn't adopt an appearance of maleness to impersonate Hamlet at the Edinburgh Festival in 2000. Instead, interestingly, she imbues her own personality with Hamlet's emotions and keeping on purpose her female appearance on stage. Michelle Terry played the Prince of Denmark with a female appearance in the Globe Theatre in 2018 in her first season as artistic director. Tessa Parr played Hamlet as a completely female character at Leeds Playhouse in 2019. Tessa Parr performed an appropriation of the prince without any male or androgynous traits, but performing Hamlet as a lesbian woman in love with Ophelia. And finally, the conclusion. Culture flows beyond frontiers, physical borders, and language barriers. Probably Shakespeare is the clearest example of cultural resilience and endurance. And Hamlet, as his most iconic character, embodies the communicative means to transgress national identities as much as gender identities. Through the act of appropriating the character of the Prince of Denmark, there is a conscious rebuilding of the whole play, redefining roles and changing the narrative perspective. A vital element is introduced in the act of Hamlet being represented by a woman. But what is especially new is the conscious activist appropriation of the Shakespearean character from a feminist ideological position, beyond the obvious performing challenge that it represents for an actress. So thanks very much for your attention.